Welcome to my channel. Today we're diving into an explainer that I'm absolutely thrilled about. We're taking a close look at the magnificent world of the Mughal Empire. But we're skipping the usual battles and conquests. Instead, we're focusing on this incredible cultural synthesis. We're going to see how they masterfully fused Persian, Central Asian, and indigenous Indian traditions into an unbelievably sophisticated society, literally the architects of a cultural golden age.
It really makes you wonder, right? How exactly did an empire of outsiders manage that? Back in 1526, the very first Mughal emperor, Babur, arrived from present-day Uzbekistan. He was a complete outsider with really deep Central Asian and Persian sensibilities. But instead of just forcing his own culture onto everyone else, Babur and the emperors who came after him kind of fell in love with the Indian landscape. They wove their traditions right into the existing super rich cultures of India. So how does an empire built entirely on military conquest transform into an absolute masterclass of cultural blending? Well, here is our roadmap for today. We'll quickly cover the philosophy of akhlaq, the influence of noble women, the Dasala revenue system, a synthesis of art, and finally, the living Mughal legacy. Number 1. The philosophy of akhlaq. Let's start by looking at the actual social fabric of the empire. So, to really get the Mughals, you have to understand the unwritten rules that governed literally every single interaction in their world. This invisible rulebook was called ikhlaq. It's a Persian term that essentially encompasses ethics, morality, and proper conduct in society. Think of it kind of like the Mughal equivalent of a modern-day finishing school, but with way, way higher stakes. It wasn't just, knowing which fork to use. Ikhlaq was an entire philosophy dictating exactly how a refined person should exist in the world.
And these rules were incredibly practical. Out in the Mughal court, every little gesture carried massive political weight. The exact depth of your bow, the specific honorifics you used when speaking, or even how many steps away you were allowed to physically stand from the emperor's throne. All of it was strictly regulated. There were even rigid dress codes directly tied to the Mansabdari ranking system, meaning your exact social status was visible from across the room. Now, that might sound like just a bunch of arbitrary pomp and circumstance, but actually, it was a genius tool for managing a gigantic, complex empire. It maintained order, it forged a shared identity, and it actively prevented conflicts among super diverse ranks. I mean, guys like Akbar's chief minister, Fazl, literally used his absolute mastery of this court protocol to fast-track his own political success. Okay, moving on to part 2, influence of noble women. Because this refined culture definitely wasn't just happening out in the public throne rooms.
We really need to shift our focus to the private sphere. You often hear the term zanana, right? The women's quarters. And people usually just think of it as a place of confinement. But historically, the zanana was this engine of immense soft power. The noble women there organized their entire households around these highly sophisticated court protocols. The zanana essentially functioned as the ultimate center of cultural transmission. It was right there that Persian poetry, classical music, and all those complex social graces were being cultivated and actively taught to the next generation of rulers.
And when you look at the real heavy hitters, elite women like Nurjan and Jahanara Begum, you're looking at individuals who wielded incredible, undeniable influence. They weren't just passively participating in the culture. They were the ones shaping the empire's whole trajectory. They sponsored the arts, commissioned architecture, and meticulously maintained the refined lifestyle that completely defined the ruling class. Up next, Section 3, the Dasala revenue system. Look, cultivating this extreme level of elegance, funding huge architectural projects, supporting hundreds of master artists, it requires a massive economic engine. So how did they actually pay for it all?
The answer is their surprisingly sophisticated administration, particularly under Emperor Akbar. Between the 1560s and the 1580s, Akbar and his incredibly brilliant finance minister, Todar Mal, completely revolutionized the empire's approach to land revenue. After a whole series of trial-and-error experiments, they finally nailed down what became known as the Dasala system in the 1580s. This was a rigorous, decade-based framework for taxation.
And it is such a perfect example of the sheer administrative genius of the Mughals. The Dasala system wasn't just some flat tax where everyone pays the same. Not at all. First, they standardized the physical measurements of the land. Then, they categorized that land based on its actual soil fertility and historical crop yield. They even created incredibly specific crop schedules called Dastur al-Amal. The whole goal here was to accurately calculate a state demand that maximized the empire's revenue, but, and this is absolutely crucial, without completely crushing the peasantry that the entire empire relied on. This meticulously planned economic foundation is exactly what bankrolled their cultural golden age. Which brings us to part 4, a synthesis of art. And wow, what a golden age it was. Let's talk about one of the most visually stunning aspects of the entire Mughal era, their breathtaking miniature paintings. Interestingly enough, the story of Mughal art actually hinges on a huge political disaster. Babur's son, Emperor Humayun, lost his throne for a while and was forced into political exile over in Safavid Persia under Shah Tahmasp. Obviously, losing your empire is a terrible day at the office, but culturally, it turned out to be the most fortunate artistic accident ever. During his exile, Humayun was totally captivated by the Persian master painters. So when he finally regained power in India, he brought 2 of those absolute masters back with him, Mir Said Ali and Abdussamad. He brought them back to establish a royal painting workshop, a Nagar Khana right inside his own library. And the sheer scale of the projects they took on is mind-blowing. Under Humayun's son, Akbar, this workshop exploded to over 100 artists. Akbar commissioned the Hamza Nama, which is this epic, illustrated account of the heroic deeds of Hamza. Guys, this was a massive 15-year undertaking featuring 1,400 illustrations. If you look at this illustration of the spies of Hamza, you can really see how dynamic this art was. The space is sharply divided, there's just incredible action everywhere, you have a strong outer line defining all the foliage, and these incredibly vibrant colors used to energize the story. And these paintings were huge. They were painted onto cloth so they could be physically held up while a storyteller read the epic out loud to the emperor. But the real magic? That happened when those imported Persian masters started working side by side with indigenous Indian artists. You had 2 totally different visual languages colliding in the best way possible. The traditional Indian style heavily favored a flat perspective, a super vivid color palette, and bold modeling. Meanwhile, the Persian style brought in this incredible subtlety, finesse, 3-dimensional realism, and a huge focus on optical reality. When you put them side by side, it's fascinating. The Mughal workshops allowed these distinct styles to coexist, assimilate, and eventually fuse together perfectly. What emerged at the end of the day wasn't just Persian art recreated in India, and it definitely wasn't purely traditional Indian art either. It was this harmonious, highly sophisticated blend of Islamic, Hindu, and eventually even European visual cultures. It was a brand new aesthetic that was entirely, uniquely Mughal. Finally, let's wrap up with Section 5, the living Mughal legacy. Because look, empires rise and fall, but a cultural synthesis of this magnitude leaves permanent marks on the world. The Mughal legacy isn't just locked away in museums. It is very much alive and well today. You can literally taste it in Awadhi Mughlai cuisine. Think about dishes like the richly spiced Murg Musalam that was developed directly in the Mughal Empire. You can clearly see it in Naslik calligraphy, which features such beautiful, natural, fluid curves that it's actually referred to as the bride of calligraphy scripts. And you can still feel it in the enduring social etiquettes, that deep respect for hospitality, and the refined greetings that are still a huge part of contemporary society in the subcontinent right now. The Mughals really show us that history isn't just about who won which battle. It's about what happens when totally different worlds meet, blend, and create something beautiful together. So I want to leave you with this thought today. Take a look around your own life. What everyday customs, foods, or social manners in your own society might actually be the hidden echoes of ancient courtly cultures? Think about it, let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you so much for exploring this fascinating explainer with me today.